Think about the cloud for a second. It's where we keep our money, our work, our private memories. We imagine it as this abstract thing, just kind of floating out there, everywhere at once. But what happens when someone decides to attack it with something very, very real?
Yeah, that's not some hypothetical question anymore, because the infrastructure that powers our digital world, well, it isn't just in the sky. It's on the ground, inside physical buildings that recently found themselves caught in the crossfire of a real-world war.
That date, March 1st, 2026, is a really critical moment. See, this wasn't your typical software bug or a simple power outage. This was something else entirely. It all started with a physical impact that then rippled outwards, affecting everything from your bank account to just basic internet connectivity.
So to really understand the fallout, we first have to look at the attack itself. This was a direct, physical strike on the heart of the digital Middle East. Now, Amazon's official report on this was very careful with its wording. It said that around 12:30 in the afternoon local time, one of its data centers, basically a fortress of servers, was physically hit by objects. The term is deliberately vague, right? But the result was anything but.
And there you have it, straight from Amazon's own status page. In just 4 words, the whole abstract idea of the cloud became brutally physical. This wasn't a line of malicious code from a hacker. This was an actual fire breaking out inside one of the most critical pieces of internet infrastructure in the entire region.
And what happened next was like a set of dominoes falling. First, the object struck the facility. The impact creates sparks, which then ignites a fire. Then, as part of standard procedure, the fire department has to cut all the power. We're talking the main grid and all the backup generators. And just like that, an entire AWS availability zone, which is basically a cluster of data centers designed to back each other up, goes completely dark.
So how did this even happen? Well, this wasn't some random accident. This strike occurred right at the peak of a spiraling regional conflict that had put the entire Gulf on high alert.
The escalation was incredibly fast. I mean, look at this. On February 28th, the US and Israel begin strikes on Iran. Just 1 day later, Iran confirms its supreme leader has been killed and immediately launches this massive wave of retaliatory attacks across the region. It's in the middle of all that chaos, on that very same day that the AWS facility gets hit. The timing is, well, it's undeniable.
Okay, so a whole section of the cloud is offline. What does that actually mean for people? Well, the digital fallout was immediate and it was widespread, affecting services that millions of people and businesses rely on every single day. For anyone in tech, this is the nightmare scenario. It wasn't just one service failing, it was the fundamental building blocks of the cloud just crumbling. The ability to process information, to store data, to run databases, even the basic tools that let different parts of the internet talk to each other, it all started to go dark. And the problem wasn't even contained, it actually spilled over and caused power and connectivity issues in neighboring Bahrain. And this is what really brings home the real-world consequences. It's one thing to talk about APIs and compute instances, but it's a whole other thing when a major bank like the Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank has to announce that its app and online platforms are completely down. Suddenly, people can't access their money, they can't manage their finances. The digital disruption hits home hard. And the fix was not quick. The initial disruption stretched for more than 18 hours, and in the digital world, that is an eternity. It's just a stark reminder of the difference between a software bug and a physical attack. You can't just reboot a building that's been on fire. This whole incident wasn't just another outage. No, it marked a fundamental shift in how we have to think about modern conflict and the new vulnerabilities of our connected world.
What makes this event so significant is that it was a historic first. We've seen cyber attacks for decades, but never before had a major US tech company's data center been knocked offline by direct military action. In that moment, the rules of engagement for modern warfare literally changed.
And this leads us to a really powerful and frankly unsettling question. For decades, conflicts in the Middle East have been fought over control of energy, pipelines, refineries, oil fields. But has the battlefield shifted?
And, experts were already sounding the alarm on this. This quote from a think tank was actually published just before the attack, and it turned out to be disturbingly accurate. They argued that in the compute era, the most valuable strategic targets are no longer just oil and gas, but the physical infrastructure of the internet itself. And this vulnerability is highly concentrated. The UAE has worked really hard to position itself as a major tech hub.
So it's not just home to Amazon's massive data centers, but also Microsoft's, Google's, Oracle's, they're all there. What this single attack revealed is that this creates a critical choke point in the entire global digital supply chain.
But the physical strike, believe it or not, was only one part of the story. At the exact same time this was happening, a second, invisible war was being waged, a parallel conflict fought entirely in cyberspace.
A massive wave of so-called hacktivist groups mobilized online, and the fight was incredibly lopsided. Of the groups that declared allegiance, the pro-Iranian groups outnumbered the pro-Israeli ones by a huge margin.
So where were these attacks directed? Well, they primarily use something called DDoS attacks, which is basically when you flood websites with so much junk traffic that they just collapse. In Israel, government sites were hit the hardest, followed by manufacturing and telecommunications. The goal here was pretty clear: pure disruption of the state and its economy. Now, what's really interesting here is the huge contrast in state-sponsored strategies. On one side, you had operations linked to Israel that were primarily destructive and financial. They claimed to wipe a state bank's data, and they stole millions in crypto. But on the other side, the Iran-linked operations were focused on psychological warfare, spreading panic with fake emergency alerts and using botnets and AI to push disinformation. Just two completely different approaches to cyber warfare.
So when you look at the whole picture, the attack on the AWS data center wasn't some isolated event. It was the moment the firewall between conventional warfare and our digital lives was definitively breached. That line we all thought existed between the two, it's been erased.
And that leaves us with a final, vital question. We've built our entire global economy, our governments, and our daily lives on this incredible cloud infrastructure. But in doing so, have we inadvertently placed the very foundations of our modern world on a new, highly vulnerable, and very real frontline?